Okay, so I've got the two web servers ready. They've been configured. I've got the ports open. So I'm able to access the web server 1 with the public IP, which says this is my web server 1, and the second one as well with the public IP, and it says this is my web server 2. Now it's time to connect them back with the load balancer. Now both of these virtual machines would be the backend pool of the load balancer. Let's go ahead and configure the load balancer and see how that works. Now I'm going to click on the load balancer button right here and then add a new load balancer. So we have the form here, the regular form that we always fill up to bill resources. Yeah. So my subscription will be pay as you go. Select my resource group, give this a name, call it as web load balancer or something, but make sure that you follow your naming standards of your company, your organization before you start naming some of these resources. All right. So I'm going to put this in the same region as my virtual machine, which is East US, and that is because my load balancers are region bound. So that means that I cannot have my load balancer somewhere sitting in, let's say, Central US and my backend pool, which is the virtual machines, sitting in East US. They must be in the same region. Okay. So I'm going to select the same region, East US here. And now we got two types of load balancers, internal and public. That's what we learned in the previous lessons, that internal load balancer is for balancing the loads internally in your VNet or probably in your on-premise as well, if you have an express route or a site-to-site connectivity. And public load balancer is for public access, for e-commerce applications where you want people on the internet to access your websites. That's when you use public load balancer. The next option that we have is SKU, basic or standard. Well, with standard, you get a lot of good features. Like you can have zone redundant option here. You will have zonal front ends for inbound and outbound access. There's a lot of health probes and rules that you can write here. And the standard load balancer is closed for public IPs by default. So you need to have explicit rules to allow the traffic to flow into the standard load balancer, right? So it is much more secure, has got a lot of features. The basic one by default is open to the public. I'll select the basic one at this time and then make sure that my load balancer has a public IP. I'll say go ahead and create new and call that load balancer as maybe something called as load balancer IP. All right. And I want this IP address to be dynamically allocated or statically allocated. Well, in production environments, you will always have static allocation to your public IP of the load balancer, right? It's because you do not want the IP address to change at all times. But because this is just a test environment, I will have a dynamic allocation. You can choose to have a public IPv6, yes or no here, but then I'm okay with no at this time. The next, you can configure the tags, and finally, review and create the load balancer. I'll click on create and then wait for the deployment to complete. It will take a minute to deploy this load balancer. We'll pause the video and connect again in the next lesson.